Hi, this is Jeff Walter, and welcome back to the podcast. Special guest today is Michael Lamkin. Michael's the Director of Business Development from Care Patrol of Northern Indianapolis. He's an experienced business development manager with a proven track record of revenue growth, market expansion, and development of new referral relationships. Strong sales professional with a deep knowledge in consumer behavior and market research, and experienced presenter and negotiator. Michael is with Care Patrol, as I said, and Care Patrol is interesting. They assist seniors and their families with the difficult task of identifying the most appropriate assisted living, independent living, memory care, or residential care facility in their area. The service is completely free or no cost to the clients, as the franchisees are paid directly by the providers in their network. And so it's a business that's very high stakes for folks, very emotional, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about it. And welcome to the podcast, Michael, and thank you for agreeing to participate. This should be a fun and educational experience.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm always looking for opportunities where I can add value. So hopefully we can get there today.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. First off, I always like to get to know autobiographically, like, how did you end up where you're at? Most of us ended up where we are by accident, but by divine accident. We kind of like weaved our way left and right and ended up in a place we never thought we would be when we started our careers way back
For
in the
sure.
day. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how you ended up where you're at, and a little
Yeah,
bit more about Care Patrol.
I appreciate that. I grew up on Indianapolis's west side and, I went to Purdue. I studied a couple different things. I like learning. I love school when it's something that interests me. And, I was on a different track record, but graduated in 2008. And in 2008, a couple different things were happening simultaneously at the financial crisis. So for us millennials about that time, it was rather difficult to find a job. And then my mom had a health setback, and thank God she's well today. But like so many families out there, I got handed discharge paperwork that talked about bathing my mom.
Yeah.
And at 22 with a history degree, it was a real shock to the paradigm that I viewed life through. Just the life experiences where, seeing her be the primary caregiver for my grandma set me on a different path. Started getting my MBA at Butler, knew that I didn't want to work in retail or something else. As valuable as those things are, it wasn't the direction I wanted to go. And so when I had the opportunity to work for a in-home care company, it just resonated. And I started working in senior care over 10 years ago. So I had the opportunity to learn a lot at that home care company and managed some programs, learned about how our healthcare system's working with healthcare initiatives, creating outcomes is kind of one of the buzzwords, and value-based care initiatives, and ultimately just resonated with things that we were doing here at Care Patrol, where I kind of saw they were already doing this thing that we were trying to create and spending a lot of time and money doing less effectively. So came on at Care Patrol 4 years ago, and we're moderately sized franchise for Care Patrol, has over 200 locations in North America. We're in the top 20 to 30. Actually, we just had our national conference and I've not gotten the debrief on where we rank, but it's where we've trended over the last several years. So we've been around about 10 years here in this market. And like you said, we're out helping families. I think the shift in the paradigm we have over the last 4 years has been towards a more of a healthcare focus or an extension
Mhm.
of the healthcare industry. So a lot of the education I'm doing with healthcare providers, other stakeholders for the clients we serve is really centered around this idea of how can we lean in and help their patients by creating better outcomes. So just a nuanced shift in how we approach things, but it's been something that's been more broadly adopted at Care Patrol.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's a little bit different than what we usually do, in that we're a couple of things are really different. One is we're taking it from the franchisee's perspective, right? And so you're a
Mhm.
franchisee in the Care Patrol network in Northern Indianapolis. So that's always, haven't done that before. So that's a new perspective. But the other thing I'm looking forward to that's really interesting is usually when you think of franchises, you think of quick service restaurants, low skill type of activities, or, the employees. But here we've got something really different. right? It's like it's the opposite end of the spectrum of that, in that you have something that's first off, it's a service, not a thing, right? It's a service, and it's a very high stakes service.
Yeah.
And the consumer, the client, the people that are involved in the purchase decision, they generally are ignorant of that industry. It's generally something people don't know much about. I know when my
Why would you
in-laws,
lean in and know anything about it if not
well,
for
exactly, like, my in-laws who are, unfortunately no longer with us, but, we entered into that world and it was like, well, when do you go to a nursing home? When do you go to assisted living? What's independent living? What are
what are
these things?
these would mean?
What do those terms mean? What are they? What gets funded by whom? Who pays for what? Like, and you're doing that at a time where your loved one is in distress. They can no longer, a lot of times it's happening when they can no longer live independently, right? And they need some support. And so it's interesting because you've got a set of clients and their loved ones that need to be educated on the options. And it's kind of, I mean, it's really kind of remarkable on the other hand, on the one hand, that there are a tremendous amount of options that are catering to specific needs of people, right? And we'll
If
get
you
into
look,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of variation state to state, which is one of the things we've talked a little bit about. Just with the franchise model, there's just a lot of variation, and even inside of Indianapolis, we have the greater Indiana territory. I mean, there could be over 700 home care providers. There are hundreds of hospice providers, over
Mhm.
150 assisted living options in the greater Indianapolis area. There are hundreds of nursing homes in Indiana, and it's paralyzing. I
Yeah.
mean, to try to go out and figure that out on your own.
Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to it. So, actually there's so many dimensions about this I'm looking forward to, right? One, I think just for people in general, any education that we can provide that you can, and when I say we, I mean you, I'll take credit, provide just on understanding this sector because it's the type of thing that most people don't have much knowledge about. But then if we look at it from a systemic standpoint, from a franchisee, you've got clients that need to be educated. You have advisors that are doing the matchmaking, and they need to be educated. And you're operating within a franchise system that has a certain set of values and processes. And so I would love to hear I'd love to get into all that. Don't know how much time you have, but we'll go into a bunch of rabbit holes. So why don't we start with the client in mind and help give us a quick education on somebody calls and says, "Help, my mom can no longer live in her house. For whatever reason, she's got,
Yeah,
you know, and I don't know what to do." I would imagine that's a
all the time,
common. So
daily, hourly.
what's the educational process? How do you guys go on, educating them? And in the process, give us a little education on what the different types of facilities are and what when you would go into one or another and what the,
Yeah.
and that. So let's start there and then work our way upstream.
If you're really interested in this, I mean, I think it's a little lateral thinking, but I think it's very similar to something called motivational interviewing. But
Okay.
ultimately, our process of educating starts with educating ourselves about each client in a kind of an old school way. We lean in and we really want to we operate through a framework of social preferences, clinical needs, finances, and sometimes timing. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is, what's important to you? How do you want to live life, or how does your loved one want to live life, or how do you want them to live life?
Right.
And so you might tell me multiple things are true. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do we rank those?
Okay.
Uh, like earlier today, someone was telling me like, "Oh, it's so great because my grandpa lives across the road within a mile of my dad. So he goes and visits that person every day." For them, like that proximity, that location piece is weighted really heavily because he has that intention. Another person really wants the best care, and we have to create a framework to define that. And location's less important. They'll tell me, "I'll drive 3 hours, I don't care. I'll drive to Ohio if it gets mom the best care."
Right.
And, we don't have to do that, but that paradigm and how you're serving that person and educating them really changes. depending upon how they self-score that. And I think the important thing to understand about that is just that in this healthcare space, so many of these outcomes that we're asking hospital systems and other providers to generate are happening where like client will tell you they want to stay at home. And yet over 6 months, they continue to readmit to the hospital. They
Hmm.
refuse to accept care. I had a program where
Yeah.
we were giving free in-home care to people and they wouldn't take it. Like 60% of the time, they declined free in-home help. And at the time, I had kids at home. If someone had offered to come in and change diapers on my kids, make meals for them, do some laundry, it bit your arm off, right? Like it would
Right.
get me. So it was a real, I thought that the biggest barrier was finances, and
Hmm.
that wasn't what proved out. So you can take someone like
Yeah.
that and ask them, okay, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is staying home to you? And if we could wave the magic wand and you could do anything with your life, what would it be? Well, I'd love to have coffee with someone at 10 a.m. every day,
Right.
and do whatever. And I'll scale 1 to 10, I'm going to rank that higher. So, not trying to disparage staying at home. I'm just trying to illustrate that for different folks, something else might be a bigger priority. And so when we look back to why aren't we creating this healthcare outcome? It's because we didn't understand what the real motivator was for this person. Then we look at clinical needs, right? So what are the barriers to the person living life that way?
Right.
Someone who has Parkinson's disease has a real different care outlook in the long run about things they're going to need. They may be independent now, but like, hey, how can we think about those things in the long term? Finances, I just think we lean in a way that is simple but effective in the sense that we give people a tool. Financial advisors are great. I have one, but they're there to really help you amass wealth, not
Hmm.
necessarily choose how to spend it. And there's
Right.
variation on that, I know, across different advisors. But our tool, in a simple way, helps someone who's even pretty affluent have the freedom to make a choice around, or the visibility to make a choice on this decision. So someone might have, at a client with $1.2 million in investment assets. They owned a home in a particular part of Indianapolis that, let's just say, the average sales price was about 660K in the last 6 months. And they made almost 10 grand a month in income from social securities, from pensions, kind of a unique client in this sense. And the son was talking to me, mom and dad both had terminal illnesses, 2-year prognoses. They had a lot of care needs. They wanted to stay at home though. But all he was doing was talking to me about assisted living. And so our tool kind of spits out at different price points. How long can a person private pay for? I'm like, son, like, why are we talking about assisted living when you guys could probably stay at home? And he's like, well, I don't think we can afford it, even with those assets. And so one-on-one care for them was going to cost probably $350,000 a year.
Hmm.
Um, they could still afford that for 6 years without selling their home. So like it gave him the freedom to honor his parents' wishes and pursue home care in a
Right.
way that, a lot of people can't afford that. But it still lets us frame that conversation. So I say sometimes timing because oftentimes A, B, and C can drive the timing bucket, but sometimes it is a choice.
Right.
You may implement a solution now or you may do it later. And the earlier we have these conversations and work through this framework, the more likely that it's a choice and less of a, oh, we got to do this now because type situation.
Well, and the timing thing, that's one of the things that happened with me personally was my mother-in-law went into rehab and came out and she could not be live independently with my father-in-law. And so all of a sudden I was like, timing drove everything, right? It's like she's being discharged on Tuesday. She needs
Totally.
to go to someplace other than back to her home because my father-in-law cannot take care of her. And then the same thing happened, you know, 6 months later with my father-in-law. He had an act, he slipped and fell, and he had some, chronic issues, and he was not able to live independently anymore. And it was like he's being discharged Tuesday, and like you get that notice, and you're like, what are we going to do, right? And so for us, for me, it was like, it's interesting. I was listening to what you were saying, and I wish somebody had laid it out the way you did, because I was
Yeah.
like,
The
as
framework
I'm
works.
listening to you, I'm going, well, for me, it was both my in-laws. It was timing because they're being discharged from a rehab facility on a certain day and they cannot go back to their home. And then the second was proximity. They lived 3 miles from my house, and my wife was sick at the time, so I was taking care of her. And so, to your point, like proximity was everything. Like I cannot go 2 hours down the road, like, and so, and then that dominated the other things. It's interesting the way you framed it. So that framing, is that a care patrol
Really,
kind of framework or?
indeed, and I think it's a bit unique to us. I think we tend to be the market leader on that space, so that there's probably some similarities, but people tend to model things close to what we do. I think the education piece for the consumer, for their families, for the stakeholders, for the healthcare industry is like the lack of visibility and just how nuanced that can become and how complicated can become because just taking someone who has less assets, less income, they might have a choice. So they might actually be able to go home, right,
Right.
with in-home care. But in doing so, they might choose to spend down some of their assets they have, take a reverse mortgage on an asset, for
Hmm.
example, or spend down cash. There could be options that they could move into that require a 2-year private pay period.
Hmm.
So the choice becomes the timing choice, and why it starts earlier for that person is like, look, you can move now, you can move later. Maybe you don't move at all. But if you choose to move later, just know that if you do it this way and you're spending down assets or you protect them and you're not going to use them anymore, you just eliminate some of these choices. I don't necessarily care what you do. I'm just here to educate you on what that choice is ahead of time so you feel good about the choice you make, right? And
Right.
so, not everyone's going to choose to do that, and that's okay. I just don't want you coming back to me in 3 years and say, "Hey, we did this. Now show me which one was it?" Well, that option's no longer relevant for you.
Well, so, going back to so it's really interesting because it's this market that people don't educate themselves on until they have a need. You just kind of, we started with the client and you kind of laid out a nice framework and you were going, social and financial and a number of other, and care, what level of care do they need and assistance and that, which was a very a very neat framework for educating the client. Right now, I I take it that then if we start going upstream a little, the person at the Camp Patrol as a franchisee doing that is an advisor of some sort, right? It's a care advisor. Is that the right term? Did I get that right?
Senior care advisors, the AI on Indeed in places doesn't like that yet, but that's what we call it.
Okay, senior care advisors, right? So how, like, I got to imagine that that's a difficult. Well, you just said, Indeed doesn't like that. That was a delayed laugh on my part. But yeah, like I was going to say, how do you find people like that?
You put that in Indeed, and it tries to bring me a financial advisor.
Right. But somehow as a franchisee, you're hiring these senior care advisors. I can only imagine that the the rare candidate is already knowledgeable on all the things that you just said, which, you know, like, how does that new hire, that new senior care advisor at your franchise, how do they become knowledgeable? Because it's really interesting because there's state law. So a care patrol in Indiana is going to be different than there's going to be slight variance than a care patrol in Michigan because
Totally.
what an assisted living facility can do in Indiana is slightly different than Michigan, and same with memory and independent living and all that. There's different financing, especially like you said, are you high net worth, low net worth? Um, do you have long term care? Are you eligible for Medicaid? Like one of the things that blew me away here in Michigan was my mother in law was able to get qualified for Medicaid because Michigan lets the one spouse transfer all their assets to the other spouse and then impoverishing themselves and being eligible
Yeah.
for Medicaid. But it's part of the Michigan Medicaid. Like, and we had hired an elder care attorney. And he's like, "This is what you do: badoom, 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 badoom," and then she qualifies. And I'm like, "But still keeps all the assets." Which is, the advisors, like, you've got the finance, you've got the care, like all the things that you just went through, how does that, you hire a new advisor, how do they become educated so they can knowledgeably advise a client? How does that?
Yeah, there's a couple different strategies. My advisors on my team, and I'm not the franchise owner, but we all weigh in on this because we are a small team, and I think it becomes so challenging to add a new person to the team if we don't all have buy-in.
Right.
Lesson we learned along the way. But my counterparts tend to be social workers, people with some industry knowledge and expectation. But it's tricky because we oftentimes are changing their paradigm a little bit about
Okay.
what care capabilities are for an assisted living, for a home care company versus a nursing home. So they have to have some flexibility. But I will say that one of the things, like, because this service isn't regulated by like the state of Indiana, it's probably not regulated in most states yet.
Hmm.
And so, what's the teeth for consumers kind of aligns with this question around how do we train them. So, Care Patrol, my understanding is requires the at least minimum the Care Patrol franchisee to attain this certified senior advisor certification, which
Okay.
is a national accreditation. It gives us all baseline knowledge on some key healthcare takeaways. And I mean it's something we put our advisors through
Hmm.
here at North Indy. And it's difficult enough that someone who's practicing as a social worker in a long-term care environment and
Hmm.
in home care environments in California and some other places around the country, she still studied for months, and like, it wasn't just this layup thing that she had to do, a box to check. It really took an investment of time and effort to achieve. So if it simultaneously gives us a code of ethics, and so if somehow, and that's part of like the laws and the ethics that we have to learn to do this job effectively, and so it gives consumers some teeth as well. Because if we ever lost that, we could lose the franchise.
So is Care Patrol the franchisor? Are they the ones doing the certification, or is it a third party certification?
I believe it's a third party. I think Care Patrol is, and this is anecdotally, my
Okay.
my sense of things, but I do think Care Patrol was involved in the creation of it. But I've seen some of our competitors go out and do the same thing, and frankly, I see some other not substitute products, but like other related services go out and get that certification as well. People not necessarily trying to do what we're doing, but some of the people we refer to, like maybe a real estate agent might do that, or
Okay.
some other kind of similar services.
So we're talking about training here, right? That Training Impact
Yep.
podcast.
What we do.
And you're bringing on an advisor. They generally have some type of social work experience in the industry, so they're not just coming out of left field. But then Care Patrol has worked, the franchisor sounds like they have worked with a third party certification agency, kind of like a software development company would work with the Management Institute to get certified project managers, right? Very different level of stakes. That's a much lower stakes type of thing. I know that so a lot of industry organizations will sit on boards and be part of a certifying agency, and it'll be independent. It's an interesting strategy, right? Rather than try and build the Care Patrol certification, and then it gets narrowed to just Care Patrol, but then your competitors don't. It's like, no, here's something we as an industry need, and so you'll get the Care Patrols of the world and some of their competitors to cooperate and sit on those boards and say, this is what a senior care advisor needs to know, and then bake it into their process. So it sounds like they're influencing that, but it's an independent board that's doing the certification. But then they're saying, we need our franchisees, their advisors need to get this certification. Is that kind of, it's part of the franchise agreement type of thing? Like,
Totally.
okay. And that's how they ensure that their brand, the typical advisor has some base level of knowledge, is they're using this third party accreditation to ensure that, and then they, okay, so that's the base. that, and you said that's national. So it's not saying this is what we do in Indiana. This is what we do in Michigan. So how do your advisors get the, okay, well, this is what, assisted living is in Indiana, which is slightly different than Michigan. And so you get those edge cases where if you in Michigan, you go to a memory care facility, but if you were in Indiana, you'd go to an assisted living facility. Same person, but slightly different places where the state draw, especially on things like that are more regulated, as opposed to home care, hospice, and independent living. It's like no, that level of care requires this type of like how does the advisor get
If
that
you
piece of
were
knowledge?
managing a tech industry, if you're managing some other things, then you're gonna look at our process, and on the face of it, you're gonna think, "Oh my gosh, like, this is not efficient, and, like, how are they doing this?" The answer to your question is really, like, the old-fashioned way. We get out, and we get out of the office. At the end of the day, when we're providing the service, that's what actually makes us competitive against some substitute products that, on the face of it, try to offer a service like what we do, but they don't have boots on the ground people doing what we do. So we're going out and we're touring every facility in our area. We're meeting with not all the home care companies, but a very
Right,
strategic selection of them. We have contracts at over like 90% of the facilities in our area. We have contracts with those dedicated providers. And then we have
right,
additional resources that we meet with in person. And so it's kind of exhaustive, but like our care advisors go in and they see the buildings sometimes daily, certain
hmm
facilities or
hmm
weekly. Because they started with the training, they start shadowing on tours with real clients and they start taking real clients. So we're out in these buildings getting real time feedback about what's happening. We get lots of feedback then from our past clients. We help over 700 people a year here in Indianapolis. And we get all this anecdotal data from them that we can then use to better our service. So it's kind of twofold, right? Our training method is to get out of the office and go out and be where these clients are getting served
right.
and learn kind of on the spot. But that's also what makes us really effective because we have this data and I mean, you can put some stuff into Google. AI can give you better information recently than
hmm
it did 6 months ago, but it doesn't know these details that we know because it can't physically go there and see it.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting because at the end of the day, you're doing a matchmaking service, and
Kind of, yeah,
so like I'm me, and I need some type of care, or my mom or my dad needs some type of care, and it's unique. What they need is unique. Their situation's unique. Their care
totally.
level's unique. Like the things you went through. So, like everybody wants to stay at home, except you like to have coffee at 10 o'clock. Well, if depending on your situation and your level of care, being home might be synonymous with no social interaction.
Totally. You have to be very intentional as a family organization to create an environment. You can do it.
Right.
It just takes a very intent like, someone who's taken, Lencioni's Frantic Family book and applied it, like, how are we gonna be ultra intentional with our family unit? You can do it, but a lot of families aren't able to or can't do that,
Or,
so
or even if you can, there's also the independence of the individual. And I think
totally.
that like one of the things that you hit
Can't
earlier.
beat mom over her head and drop her off at a facility. We don't do that. We don't
Well,
kidnap people,
well, no,
so
not the kidnapping, but I mean, like you can do the intentional family thing, right?
yeah,
But mom just wants to be able to walk down to the cafe and sit and have coffee without
totally.
16 family members having to coordinate. Yeah, like it's part of being independent, right? Like I am an independent adult and I want to be able to do this. I can't drive, but I can walk down to the cafe that's in the independent living facility. I can go down to the bridge game that's down there. I don't like that's one of the things I saw, personally was, and I think that some of that reluctance that you were talking about earlier is like, look, these are people that have raised families, that have had jobs, that have been independent their entire lives. And now they're not able to be independent. And it's a huge they want to maintain as much independence as possible. And anyway, not to drill down that
There's a
point.
lot of counterintuitive, kind of pieces to this, and that's one of the things that we try to educate around is that by bringing in services or moving into a facility, you're actually bringing yourself back independence. There's different ways to package it, but it does take a load off your primary caregiver, whether that's a spouse or a kid, or just a church member. They're still going to be involved. There's still a role for them to be that. It's just going to look different.
Well, and getting back to the training thing, it's it's interesting because okay, so you got this national certification, and then the franchisor, Care Patrol, is saying, okay, I want my advisors to get this certification. So as a franchisee, that's part of what you're doing, right? You're getting that, your advisors are getting that base certification. But then it's interesting because, one of the challenges of franchise training in general or partner training in general, from from the franchisor perspective is, well, everything's about the product, right? I can't go buy courses off the shelf, right? So here I've got a kind of an off the shelf certification. It gives me a base, gives my franchisee staff a base knowledge, but my product is still very specific to me. And what's really interesting when you're saying getting out there, it's from a learning perspective. There is no course you can buy or build that says this facility does this, that facility does that. Like a perfect example. I'll use my own personal example. My mother-in-law, she went back home for one night, back to a rehab, and then into a nursing home. The reason she went into a nursing home is she was bedbound. She
Mm,
needed a two-person transfer to get to get out of bed, to get in a chair. And I went to, and I talked to a bunch of people, and and everyone's like, oh, assisted living, one person transfer. If you need two-person transfer, you need to go to a nursing home. That's the data I got, right? Fast forward 6 months, my father-in-law ends up needing to go into assisted living. We find a place for him. It checks all those other boxes you were saying. He gets in there. He starts asking the medical director about transferring his wife into his apartment, he comes up to me. He goes, "They said they can do it." And I'm like, okay, sure. And anyway, I go meet the medical director, and I go, "Well, this is her situation, right? She needs this, 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 and this, and she needs a two-person transfer. She's bedbound." And the medical director goes, "We do that. The husband over in 35A, he's bedbound, and the wife over in 62B, I'm like, I thought that assisted living facilities didn't do two-person transfers because that's what everybody told me." So the beautiful news about that is we were able to transfer my mother-in-law to live with my father-in-law, and they were able to live together until which was so much better than him being in one facility, her being in another. Like it was a beautiful way unfortunately they passed, but end of life, right? They work together in the
yeah.
same place. And you could just see how much it brought joy to them.
Yeah. And
And
then that's why I think working with someone in this space, whether it's Care Patrol or a senior care advisor from anywhere that has a similar paradigm, ideally we would minimize the amount of times you move.
yeah,
I mean, it used to be nothing when I was working home care to hear from a family who'd been at 7 different facilities. And I think the process to move into assisted living probably varies state to state some as well, but generally speaking, right, there's a deposit, there's a review of medical records, there's a medical
hmm
assessment, and there's some I've seen where families can be told something, but to your point earlier, your paradigm that you're viewing this situation through is so far removed. You
right,
can be told, what we don't do two-person transfers, but here's why it's not going to be a problem for you. And you as the consumer think, okay, they can do two-person transfers. I've been there. In fairness to that salesperson, they said they can't. Yet what
yeah.
you heard was something different. And so
Well,
that
I
happens.
had I had not checked that particular facility. What I had done is I had gone to other facilities. They were like, "We only do one person. We only do one person." And then I talked to people, and people that were in the industry, and they said, "Oh, they don't do two. Assisted living doesn't do." And where I was going with that whole thing was back to the training and educating the advisors, because some folks might take what you just said and dismiss it as, oh, they're not really doing training. They're, kind of boots on the ground type of thing. But the thing I find fascinating about that approach, I'm just looking at the training approach for a franchisor franchisee model and trying to abstract that from here, is you got the franchisor saying, I need everybody to have this baseline knowledge. But then there's so much idiosyncratic knowledge, not just within the state, but within the particular geography that you're in. That and it's one of those, once you've seen one facility, you've seen one facility, right? They're
Totally.
they're lumped into these categories, but what I learned is
It
they
changes.
it changes, and what they're capable of doing is varies a lot. And so getting out and going and talking to facility A, having the advisors get out and go talk and build relationships with all these facilities, they build that idiosyncratic knowledge. It's like a Socratic way of going out and learning, that it's really, you know, it'd be hard to capture that into a course, let's say, right? Because there's so many different, it's an interesting way of attacking the problem. Like it's interesting because as I've been doing this podcast, I've been talking to a bunch of people about it. Well, how do you educate people? How do you educate people? And there's so many interesting ways of doing it that are not necessarily formal training programs, right? Like I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm going, they're going out, they're building relationships, they're getting a sense of what is the right fit in this facility versus this other facility, and at the same time capturing all this information about the particulars, right? And that's where I was going with my father-in-law story, right? It's like if there was an advisor if I had happened to talk to an advisor who happened to have toured all the facilities within our area, they would have said, "Oh, your mother-in-law needs a two-person assist. If you're in a position where you can afford assisted living and pay out of pocket, here are the four places that would do a two-person transfer," right?
Totally.
And all the other things too, right? But it's interesting. I'm looking at, again, from an educational, how did they acquire the knowledge standpoint? It's
I,
interesting.
I think from a training perspective too, like I look at what I do not as like sales, like a four-letter word, but I look at it as educating or training
Yeah,
our referral partners when I go out and work with them. Because I think one of the things I get asked a lot, like, why isn't the hospital helping me with this? Or I'm I'm talking to someone who's a healthcare professional in a hospital system and they're thinking like, well, I've got this. Why do I need you? And so, like, if you were a manager of a related entity, you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just train my staff to do what they do, can control that whole process?
right,
And it's the same reason we're so effective is that if you're a social worker who makes referrals like this in a hospital system, you don't leave the hospital.
right.
You don't know what's going on out there. And it's beyond a full-time job for one person to keep apprised of all this information.
Hmm.
So and at the end of the day, they have other jobs that they have to learn and things they have to do and be apprised of. So it's a real win-win-win.
Yeah,
It's a win for the facility that pays us because we bring them this right fit patient that's been educated on what they can and can't do in a more effective way. It's a win for the consumer because they don't have to spin their wheels like you described, trying to find the right place through trial and error. And then it's a win for the health system because essentially I just took a load of responsibility off of their employees' plates. They don't have to worry about training that person. Like what they need trained
exactly.
on, I do for free. And then we
Yeah.
actually do service for free too. So it's kind of counterintuitive. Like it sounds crazy, but it really works.
No, but it makes total sense because when we first started talking about it, it was interesting because it really is in my pea brain. It's a matchmaking service, right? It's like you're trying to find the right fit, right? And the beautiful thing about our society is we have a lot of different options. And going through that list that you were like social care, finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, no matter how you prioritize those things, I guarantee you, and timing, no matter how you prioritize those things, I guarantee you can find a half a dozen options, right? And therefore, well, which ones do you pick? Like you got the four, like you rattled off the numbers in northern Indiana. You're like, there's hundreds of these and hundreds of those and 500 of these. okay, which one do I send mom to? Right?
It's a
Or
lot.
none, because there's another 100 that will come to my house. Right?
It's a
And
lot.
like, and so, yeah, so I look at it as a matchmaking. And the interesting thing about the matchmaking, and again, I keep bringing it back to training because
Sure. That's
that's what we do. But the matchmaking is really about getting that idiosyncratic knowledge and being able to get. I like the model. You're getting this baseline knowledge from this national um, certification, right? And then you're getting the idiosyncratic knowledge by going out to the marketplace and going, you know, it's like just picturing a matchmaker going, so what do you like to see in a husband? Like, you know, what do you
we
like?
are we are senior living geeks. We've
Oh,
become these, and then to your point, it is a continual education. The other thing I think that national accreditation does is I ask for some continual education every
yeah,
year to maintain that certification. So from like a system setting, there is like continual update, but then locally that idiosyncratic information. I mean, as the director of business development, I think the stages where Care Patrol developed that franchise system, implemented that baseline certification, went into franchise owners. Now they got to know the boots on the ground, educating themselves on their area. But really, that third stage was growing that team, having multiple advisors, and having a director of business development or some other outward facing entity. Because for a couple reasons, one, I can help with that ongoing education. So again, like, I mean, I am a salesperson. That's how God made me. But my paradigm for that is maybe a little bit different. And so, how am I bringing value to my team besides just creating a pipeline of stuff coming in? So I have to go out and truly train the healthcare system that refers to us to make my teammates more effective and create a environment where the client is able to get educated in a way that isn't disruptive. So, just for example, like I could go into a hospital and get a referral from someone, and the client's been told, "Look, I want you to talk to Jeff. His
uh-huh.
mom's fallen, and now she's a two-person assist. I want you to help her find a nursing home," which we don't do. But
Right,
that's the referral I get. They've already been told, "Hey, Jeff, your mother-in-law needs a nursing home." So I get to come. My care advisor otherwise has to come in and say, "That's not actually true,
right,
and
right,
here's why."
right,
If depending upon your answers to a whole bunch of questions, right?
right,
So
right,
for
right, right.
me now, I'm going in and educating now the social worker, and then it leads to the next person in the physician, and then some other random person in the hospital that I didn't realize, talked about this, but like a not random, but like a physical therapist. Now all these people have to be educated that, well, so the reality is in Indiana, they regulate these products on a framework. And so there's just a lot of education that I'm having
Uh-huh.
to break down years of misconceptions they built up and in a real boots on the ground kind of way.
Yeah, well, and I think in that, going back to what we first said, even with people that are in the industry, at the hospitals or at the rehab centers, the nurses and the social workers there, y- it's just like they just know they tend not they tend just to know the category, but not the particular. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have a predefined understanding of what a nursing home is, what a memory care unit is, what an independent care and and assisted living, and not that this particular assisted living place or this particular independent care or this particular hospice or home hospice or these particular guys do these particular things, which is a better fit for you. And I really like it. It's really a win-win-win, and that's where I keep getting back to the matchmaking because each client has individual preferences, and each facility is slightly different. And then it's part of it's it's funny. I never thought about it, but this when we first started talking. But I was talking to somebody else, completely different type of franchise, right? Completely different. It was the Batteries Plus guy, right? These guys are training technicians to put batteries in phones and computers, and yes, so completely different, right? Humans, machines, and but the interesting thing there is was what one of the things they found is the better they trained the people, the more satisfied they were with the franchise, and the less turnover the franchisee had, right? And I'm
We
and I'm
recently had
and
someone, she's young, so I think she probably skews towards a demographic that changes jobs more frequently, right? And we're like 3 weeks in, I don't feel like we've trained her enough. We don't feel like we've trained her enough. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is the most best training I've ever gotten at any of the jobs I've done." And, it's a small sample size because she's young, but
yeah.
it's like, boy, it's like, oh my gosh, like, it's kinda scary. Uh,
Well, but the cool thing is, I think I think you guys get a twofer. It would be really interesting to see the data on this, right? I think you guys get a twofer because if you're getting that base level certification knowledge, and then you as a franchisee within the franchise system are systematically going out and going, go to this facility, educate yourself. Go to this facility, build a relationship, educate yourself. Build a relationship, educate yourself. You're getting all the idiosyncratic knowledge. It'd be really interesting to see the franchisee turnover, right? Vis-a-vis, but then also from the matchmaking perspective, again, and you hit it about 15 minutes ago. You want to minimize the number of times that the client switches facilities, right?
Absolutely.
It's very disruptive. It diminishes their quality of life, right? You want them to get into the right facility that meets those needs you laid out. And so having a better educated advisor that can tease out the multidimensional needs of the client, combined with having a very in-depth understanding of the particular
Very
facilities
unique.
in that area, in that geography, allows them to make a better match. Which it'd be interesting to see research data on this. Does that lead to a higher satisfaction on the client and their family
Totally.
versus folks that don't go through that process? Right?
Totally. I mean, there's no perfect building. I mean, you're dealing with people, but I mean, that's absolutely, and some of that I can't totally share all of because, but that data is what, like you said, it's a twofer. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. We know that to be true, and that's part of what my pitch to providers is in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think if you understand activity-based cost accounting, and maybe this audience is gonna understand that better, right? That's the language I would speak to a facility. Like, why do we need you? I'm like, "Well, go look at your data for what it costs you to move someone in and then move them out in a month."
Right.
It's crazy, So, but hey, we'll bring you someone that stays and is
And
more effective.
that's the big cost items. But then there's also the cost of the client whose family is not happy with the match, right? They are going to one, they're not happy, and the client's not happy. So that's just a bad thing to start with. But two, they're going to consume a lot more time and energy of your staff because they're not happy and
Totally.
they want to be happy. So they're going to try and take your square and make a circle out of it, right? And they're going to, because it's a mismatch, right? And so they're going to want to try and morph you, the facility, to what they want, and you're going to push back, but it's going to consume a lot of time and energy,
Absolutely.
which can provide, which costs money, and it's the so you get it's the two things, right? Like the extreme example is they switch facilities and they switch vendors, and it's what you said on the cost of moving in, moving out. But then there's the soft cost of it's just a bad fit. It's changing the culture of this facility because you've got some unhappy people here, and yeah, and so like I talked to a gentleman from a franchise sales organization, and so they have franchise, and it was a matchmaker, but it was a franchisor franchisee matchmaking, right? So their business was bringing new prospective franchise owners into the fold, right? So they've got a bunch of brands, franchisors they represent, and they're out there sitting there going, "Hey, Mike, you're interested in owning a franchise," and they have their rubric, right? Well, What do you like to do? What are you interested in? What are your resources? And then based on this, here's the franchisors I would suggest for you. And it's a free service to you. You wouldn't think these two things are the same, but they're very similar from a model perspective. It's a free service to you because they're getting paid by the franchisor. The interesting thing we talked when we got into talking, we got into education and all that kind of stuff, was it was the same thing. A better match leads to less turnover of the franchisee and a happier, more satisfied set of franchisees. And so it's the same thing here, but it's with the client and the client and the facility. You're educating your advisors so they have all this knowledge, very idiosyncratic, so that you can make a better match so that the facility has a better fit client and the client has a higher satisfaction experience, which especially at that point is, and now we get back to the reality of the service that translates into a higher quality of life for the individuals and for their families, and which is like heartwarming. I mean, it sounds cold and calculated the way we're talking about it, but when you bring it back into the human, it's like it's heartwarming because they're able to maximize their quality of life.
And I think when you look at other industries and different things, like, hearing it like talked about that way, I mean, I do think you run the risk of thinking, oh, this sounds like a computer program, with if statements that are nested. And like, if this is true and this is true, then this is the output. This is what we're going to do. And I've looked real hard. You asked me before when we were talking about where do I see this going in the future, and
Yeah.
I mean, I think uh, AI is a real thing that's on our radar. How do we implement that? How do we use that? I still think for some of the same reasons, right? Like, we're somewhat protected in the sense that, like, some of this niche information is probably not going to be available in the avenues AI has to educate itself, at least in the near term. But I do think it's probably going to make us more efficient. I mean, I think when we look at our franchise size, we're probably going to be smaller than we might have otherwise been if not for that. I think it's going to be something we're going to be able to use internally. I'm really excited about it. During COVID, if we had some other things you kind of cued me on as we
Mhm.
talked to were, other things like augmented reality or virtual reality. I mean, I think kind of holistically to your point about the numbers of things out there are so many solutions that are senior focused right now. There's
Yeah.
lots of neat ideas out there being brought to market every day. Like, it's like drinking from a fire hose, even for us. So we are trying to stay at least what's on the periphery, what's something that we can use to add to our portfolio for our clients to help create a better outcome. Even if it's something that's going to be pro bono for us to refer, which is okay. It's about creating that outcome and creating value. But I do think if, you know, virtual tours online that may become more prevalent with some of those tools, but it's not something that I'm seeing right now.
Well, I think, and I agree with you. I think there's a lot of tools and like the virtual, and I think the AI will eventually help because you can ask it questions and that. I think it's that framework that you're talking about, and then getting a good cultural fit, right? Like,
Like,
and and it's like the same. It's interesting. I'm sorry, I'm just free associating. It must be like Tuesday, but it's also it's the same advice I give people like when they're looking for a job, right? It's like, well, part of the job is what you just said. It's like, okay, there's, these particulars, like what's it like? What's the work you're doing? But then there's also just the cultural, right? It's like, is that a fit with the type of person you are with the value system that you have? Because if it is, you're going to be much happier there. Even if the actual work that you do is not spot on with brings you at maximum joy, as opposed to going into an environment where it's just culturally a misfit, but you get to do the exact tasks that you like. And
absolutely.
and there's so many things like that that are fits. It's that matchmaking, it's that fit. And a lot of that boils down into what I'll just call cultural. And that's a really hard thing. I think the AI could get you a lot of the bits and bytes and stuff and what's it like there. And you can be better educated and you can go see the facility from your own, but 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 it's hard to get a sense of what the facility's like without actually stepping into it, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, so you can, now that virtual tour is much better than here's a brochure with a couple of pictures, right? Or here's
Absolutely.
a website that has a bunch of pictures. But there's that human and especially in the service that you guys are providing, it's such a high stakes service because it's about somebody's quality of life, and so
Absolutely.
it's really cool. So it's really cool. So that hey, that we're right. Just see, we've been talking for a while now.
Yeah, time flies.
I'm having a blast. Well, and I'm learning a lot. I sound like a broken record. I love doing this because I learned so much, and I've learned so much from you, Michael. So thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience before we we wrap up, or any thoughts?
No, I mean, if people have questions, I'm happy to make myself available. I am narrowly focused on North Indy, but being blessed to work for an awesome franchise system, um, do you think we've got relationships with many of our other franchises, and have never encountered one that wasn't great to work with. So, if you're not in the North Indianapolis market, chances are, across 200 different locations, there's someone that can reach out and help you. More rural locations are a little trickier. Sometimes we don't directly operate, but I'm still happy to have conversations around that and try to arm you with some baseline knowledge. And then, because if the most important thing is to stay in that rural area, you may have one choice, and that's what it is. But
Right.
if that's the most important thing to you, great. But if it's not, then sometimes that's where the Care Patrol franchises can come into play. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
if somebody did want to get a hold of you or Care Patrol of Northern Indianapolis, sorry, what would they do? How does somebody get a hold of you or Care Patrol of Northern Indianapolis?
yeah. So they can just give our office a call, um, or reach out to me directly. I'm happy to get my contact info. I'm not sure how this all goes out,
Wait,
but if
wait.
there's a way to put it in the chat, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, we can
So
put that in the notes section and all that. So it'll be out in the notes. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time and for educating me, educating the audience. I think it was really interesting because on the one hand, I learned more about that whole industry sector, which is something that, knock on wood, we all live long enough to need those services, right?
then
Amen. And help our loved ones, but also then kind of extrapolating from that general lessons. It's a interesting training model of that national certification for a third party, and then boots on the ground to learn more about the idiosyncratic options available within a particular geography. And so it's a really neat way of getting getting that knowledge to the advisors and then getting the advisor knowledge out to the clients. So thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it.
likewise, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and hope you have a blessed week.
Thank you. And for all you folks out there, thanks for tuning in and listening. We really appreciate your support and have a great day.